Been a couple of shows on TV recently about old folks homes, or what used to be called old folks homes, care homes I suppose, places where the old and infirm spend the last parts of their lives, if they're not spending them plugged into machines in hospitals prior to their dying. And some of those documentaries and those shows and the homes themselves are pretty appalling, really. They're awful. One of my uncles spent his last few months in a care home, and that was a pretty unpleasant experience. He wasn't watched properly, so he was always getting up and wandering around, sometimes in his pyjamas for hours on end, and the police had to be sent out to look for him. And when he eventually died, he just died on his own in his bedroom, just kind of sprawled across his bed. Good chap. So, but it seems to me even the best ones, even the really, and I've seen the inside of some really nice care homes, old folks homes recently, and but even those, they're not great. The level of care might be good, and the care assistants or nurses are often very nice, and the level of care is appropriate to the huge prices they charge. But even so, the actual quality of life of the individuals in those places, I don't know. It's just hard to believe that it's great. I think if you're spending 9 hours a day sitting in a chair in a day room with a sign on the wall telling you what your next meal is because you might forget otherwise, and everything you do has to be helped. That's really hard to think about, really. And the tenacity, I think, with which people hang on to life, which again I've seen recently, is quite remarkable. That even in the most apparently just in conditions of apparent no positive value at all, no positive features at all, in conditions in which dignity is really hard to find, people in those conditions still seem to be very tenacious, and if not willfully tenacious, even when people say, yes, I'm absolutely ready to die, I'm comfortable with that. What does that really mean? And I suppose what all I'm saying there is that there's a marked lack of alternatives. You either hang on to life with grim death, pardon the oxymoron, or you just kind of relax and let people look after you until every brain cell has stopped functioning and every bodily organ is packed in, and then just turn the machine off. There doesn't seem to be a viable alternative to those things, and I think it's really important, actually. I think our approach to death, and our own deaths, but everybody else's deaths as well, is something we really, really need to sort out. I know that it's said, I don't know by whom exactly, it is said that some other cultures have a better approach to it. I'm not convinced. And those usually involve some kind of mystical or religious or spiritual practice or belief, whether it be the 42 virgins waiting for you in paradise, or whether it be the series of bardos that you go through if you're a Tibetan Buddhist, or whether it be some kind of pearly gate situation. There are at least suggestions of slightly hopeful suggestions about something else, but even then I don't like that. Those aren't great, because they're just kind of continuations, and I think we need to get a reality check on that, really. You don't continue. You do, I think, when you die, I do think you don't continue. Other things take place, but continuity isn't one of them. So I don't know what those things are. I'm an atheist, so those particular narratives are absent from my consciousness. But I have other forms of consolation, which I've spoken about before. But how much consoling these things give you? It's consolation. It's not. That's not a narrative. That's someone stroking you and saying, "Never mind, it'll be all right." It's consoling is what you do in an unpleasant and untenable situation. It's not a solution or an alternative, really. I suppose we just need an alternative car park, an alternative solution. The nearest thing I've got to to a thought about that, and this is really half-baked, is something that I was reminded of in an episode of The Simpsons. There's an episode where I think Bart and Lisa go off to camp or something like that, and maybe they join the army, I can't remember. They're away from home anyway, and Bart integrates really well with his buddies in the camp, but Lisa is kind of ostracised, and she's off on her own. And one of the things she does is she calls her grandpa, and of course grandpa is in one of these typical old folks' homes I've talked about. It's a deeply unpleasant situation, and he's only hanging on to life because there's no alternative. But and nobody speaks to him for most of the time. But Lisa calls him up because she's so lonely, and engages him in conversation for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and keeps asking him stories of his life, what he did in the war, this, that, and the other. And the kind of terminus of that conversation is that he says, "Well, that's pretty much everything that happened to me up until the point where I answered the phone." So he's narrated his whole life, and he's kind of offloaded and downloaded his entire life onto his progeny. So Grandpa Simpson's been on the phone to Lisa for hours on end, and he's offloaded his entire life onto his progeny. It seems like to me, if you were going to die, that would be a good time to do it, when you've somehow managed to exhaust everything that you've ever said, never thought, never done.